She didn't mean to save anyone that night. She was just trying to get home before the rain started. Tatum Brooke had worked a double at the Rosewood Diner. 11 hours on her feet, 2 broken tables, a grease burn on her left wrist that still throbbed under her sleeve. It was almost midnight when she cut through the Hargrove Street parking garage, the shortcut she always took, the one her coworker Elena kept telling her to stop using. It's not safe, Tatum. Nothing good happens in parking garages after 10. Tatum had always laughed that off. She was 22 years old, and she'd grown up in neighborhoods where the parking garage was the nicest building on the block. She almost walked right past him. The boy was tucked behind a concrete pillar on the second level, knees pulled to his chest, wearing a school jacket that wasn't nearly warm enough for late October. He couldn't have been older than 7, maybe 8. His hair was dark and damp, like he'd been sitting there since before the drizzle started, and he was holding a backpack so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Tatum stopped. She looked around. No car idling nearby, no adult pacing on a phone. No one. Just a little boy alone in a parking garage at midnight. She crouched down to his level. Hey, sweetheart, are you okay? He looked up at her. His eyes were dry, which somehow made it worse. He wasn't crying. He looked like someone who had already used up all his tears. I'm waiting for my uncle, the boy said. Your uncle? Tatum sat back on her heels. When did he drop you off? The boy thought about it. When it was still light outside. Before you keep listening, if you're new to Ava's Romance Library, hit that subscribe button right now. We tell stories like this one every single week, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Tatum didn't leave him there. Of course she didn't. She sat down on the cold concrete next to him, ruined her last clean pair of jeans, and she asked him his name. Felix, he said. Felix, that's a good name. I'm Tatum. She held out her hand like they were meeting at a dinner party. He shook it very seriously, the way little kids do when adults treat them like people. How old are you, Felix? 8.5. 8.5. Okay. Does your uncle have a phone? Felix reached into his backpack and pulled out a child's tablet, the chunky kind with the rubber bumper case. The screen was cracked across one corner. He'd already tried calling. Tatum could see the call log. Uncle Ro 6 times, all unanswered. She pulled out her own phone and dialed the number from his screen. It went straight to voicemail. A man's voice, low and clipped, no name, just, leave a message. She didn't leave a message. She looked at the boy, this small, serious, dry-eyed boy who had been sitting alone in a parking garage for hours. And she made the kind of decision that changes everything without you realizing it in the moment. Come on, she said. Let's get you somewhere warm. She took him to the diner. It was closed, but she still had her key. She sat Felix at the counter, made him hot chocolate from the machine they usually reserved for paying customers, and set a plate of leftover pie in front of him while she tried the number again. Nothing. She was about to call the police. She really was. She had her thumb on the 9 when the front door of the diner opened. She hadn't unlocked the front door. The man who walked in was not what she expected. She'd imagined Felix's uncle as some careless 20-something who'd lost track of time, maybe a little drunk, apologetic and embarrassed. What walked through that door instead was 6 feet of controlled stillness in a charcoal coat, dark eyes scanning the room the way a person scans a room when they're used to rooms containing threats. He found Felix in under 2 seconds. Then he found her. That's Uncle Ro, Felix said very calmly, and took another bite of pie. Rowan Calder. That was his name, though Tatum wouldn't learn it for another 20 minutes. What she learned first was that he had not been reachable because someone had put a knife in his shoulder in the alley 3 blocks east, and he had dealt with that situation. Dealt with it in ways she chose not to ask about before coming here, because Felix was the only person on earth Rowan Calder could not be late for. He stood at the counter and looked at his nephew. His face did something complicated and brief that Tatum would think about for a long time afterward. Then he looked at her. You found him. He wasn't hard to find, she said. He was right there. Most people walk past. Tatum thought about that. Most people don't look down. Rowan Calder looked at her for a long moment. She noticed, then, that his left hand was pressed flat against his side under the coat, and that the coat was dark enough that you wouldn't immediately see what was seeping through it. But she was a waitress, and waitresses notice things. Spills, stains, someone who's holding themselves very carefully to avoid pain. You're bleeding, she said. I'm aware. You need a hospital. I don't do hospitals. She stared at him. He stared back. Felix finished his pie and pushed the plate aside with the satisfied air of someone who had no concerns whatsoever. I have a first aid kit in the back, Tatum said, because what else do you say? It's a diner kit, so it's mostly burn cream and Band-Aids, but I also have a sewing kit and I grew up with 3 brothers, so. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, more like recalibration. All right, Rowan Calder said. She stitched him up at the prep table in the back kitchen. Felix asleep on a booth cushion she'd dragged through from the front. The wound was a knife cut, clean and deep, along the ridge of his shoulder. It had missed anything vital, which she told him, and he said he knew, which she believed. He didn't flinch, not once. She'd stitched up her brother Caleb twice. Once after a bar fight in Tulsa, once after a fence post incident that none of them talked about anymore. And Caleb had hissed and cursed and called her names the whole time. Rowan Calder sat perfectly still and watched the middle distance with the focused blankness of someone who had made a decision a long time ago to stop registering pain as information worth acting on. Who did this? She asked. She wasn't sure why. She knew it was none of her business. Someone who won't do it again. She tied off the last stitch and sat back. Is Felix safe? He looked at her then. Really looked at her, the way he hadn't quite done before, like he was recalibrating again. But this time the math was taking longer. Why do you ask it like that? Because you're not an accountant, Tatum said. And I'd like to know if the kid I just made hot chocolate for is going to be okay. The silence stretched out. Felix is the safest person in this city, Rowan said. I can promise you that, because of you, because of me. She believed that too. She didn't know why, or maybe she did a little, in the way you know things in your chest before your head catches up. She handed him the roll of gauze and he dressed his own shoulder with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it before, many times without help. You should go, he said. It wasn't unfriendly. It was just a fact he was presenting to her. I live 6 blocks from here, Tatum said. So I will, yeah. She started cleaning up, dropping the used supplies in the trash, running water over her hands. Make sure he gets home okay. She was almost to the back door when he spoke again. Tatum. She stopped. She hadn't told him her name, but Felix had probably said it, or he'd seen the name tag she'd forgotten to take off, or there were explanations. She turned around. There's going to be a car outside your apartment tomorrow morning, he said. A black Suburban. Don't be alarmed. She stared at him. Why? Because the man who put a knife in my shoulder knew where I was tonight, which means someone told him, which means I don't yet know the shape of this problem. He paused. And you were here. Tatum absorbed this. I'm a waitress, she said. I make $11.50 an hour, and I have a Netflix password and a library card. I'm not part of anything. You are now, Rowan Calder said. I'm sorry. He said it like he meant it, which was the most unsettling thing he'd done all night. The Suburban was there in the morning. Black tinted windows, engine running even though it was parked, which she'd always heard was a bad sign. She stood at her apartment window for a long time, still in her pajamas, coffee going cold in her hand, looking at it. Then she went to work, because her rent was due, and the Suburban wasn't her problem, except the Suburban followed her. Not aggressively, not obviously, to anyone who wasn't looking. But Tatum Brooke had grown up knowing which cars on the block belonged there, and which ones were visiting, and this car was always exactly half a block back, stopped when she stopped, moved when she moved. By the time she got to the diner, she'd decided she was furious. She lasted 4 hours before she pulled out the number, Felix's tablet, Rowan's voicemail, the one that just said leave a message, and called it. This time he picked up on the second ring. You're following me, she said. I'm having you followed. Different thing. It's not a different, she exhaled. She was in the walk-in cooler, because it was the only place in the diner that felt private. You need to stop. I told you. I'm not involved in whatever this is. Someone broke into your apartment last night, he said. The cold in the walk-in suddenly felt different. What? Between 2 and 4 a.m. they didn't take anything. They were looking for something, or they were sending a message. A pause. Either way, I need you to not be alone right now. Tatum leaned against a shelf of industrial mayonnaise and stared at the ceiling of the walk-in cooler and thought very specifically about her coworker Elena saying it's not safe, Tatum. I don't understand, she said. I found a kid in a parking garage. That's all I did. You found my kid, Rowan said, in the wrong part of the wrong garage on the wrong night. The man who cut me was watching that garage. He saw you. He ran your name. From what? Your name tag. She looked down at her chest. Tatum, black letters on a white background. $11 at the uniform supply shop on Fletcher Avenue. This is insane, she said. Yes, Rowan agreed. I know. I'm sorry. Again, that directness. No padding, no softening, just the plain acknowledgement of something he'd caused. I need to meet with you, tonight if possible. I need to explain some things, and if I say no, then the car stays outside your building anyway because I made a decision about that and I'm not on Mackie. That is not how consent works, Tatum said. Silence. You're right, he said. It isn't. She hadn't expected that either. They met at a restaurant called Halverson's, which Tatum had passed 100 times and never gone into because nothing on the menu was under $40. Rowan Calder had a table in the back corner. She would later learn he only ever sat with his back to a wall, that this was as reflexive as breathing, and he stood when she came in, which no man had stood for her since her grandfather. He told her the shape of it over the course of 40 minutes and a meal she barely tasted. His name was Rowan Calder. He managed, he said carefully, a network of commercial interests in the city that were, in the formal sense, legitimate, and in the informal sense, not entirely. He had enemies. He had always had enemies, and he had always been able to manage them because his own network was older and stronger and better organized, and because Rowan Calder did not make mistakes. Felix was his sister's son. His sister was Elena Calder, who had left this life 10 years ago, married a man named Paul Sutter, and moved to Portland. And those were the best 10 years of Rowan's life, because they were the years his sister was safe. Felix visited twice a year, 2 weeks in summer, 1 week at Thanksgiving. Rowan lived for those 3 weeks in a way he could not have explained to anyone who hadn't seen him with the boy. Felix had been dropped off at the garage by a driver Rowan had used for 3 years without incident. That driver, it turned out, had been approached 2 weeks prior, had been given a choice and had made the wrong one. The drop-off had been deliberate. Felix left exposed as a message, a pressure point, a way of telling Rowan we know what you care about. The man with the knife had been a follow-up. They wanted to scare you, Tatum said. They wanted to remind me that I'm not untouchable. Rowan set down his fork. They miscalculated. How? Because Felix wasn't there for very long. He looked at her across the table. Because you walked through that garage, there it was. The thing she'd been circling since last night. The weight of it. I didn't do anything, she said. I just sat with him. Made him hot chocolate. You kept him safe for 4 hours, Rowan said. You didn't panic. You didn't call anyone who could have made the situation complicated. You took care of him. Something in his jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. You took care of him better than the people I paid to do exactly that. The restaurant was quiet around them. Someone at a nearby table laughed at something, and it sounded very far away. I need to know, Tatum said. What you want from me? Because this feels like it's building towards something, and I'd like to know what. I want to make sure you're safe, he said. That's all. Until I've identified everyone involved in this. Until I know the problem is resolved. I'd like you to have protection. I don't want protection. I know. I have a job. I have a life. I have a sister in Decatur I'm supposed to visit next month. None of that changes. It already changed, she said. Someone broke into my apartment. He had the grace to look at that directly, to not flinch from it. Yes, and I'm going to fix that. People keep saying they're going to fix things, Tatum said. And mostly what they mean is that the fixing is going to inconvenience me. He almost smiled. It was the most human thing she'd seen him do. That's probably fair. She didn't agree to anything that night. She went home, in a car he'd arranged, which she accepted because it was raining and she was tired, not because she was giving him anything. And she stood in her apartment doorway and looked at the place where she'd lived for 2 years. The scuffed floors and the crooked bookshelf and the framed picture of her and her sister at the Grand Canyon, and she tried to feel it the way you feel a violation. She felt it. But she also noticed that the dead bolt had been replaced. New hardware, same brand, but she hadn't bought it. It had been done while she was at dinner, quietly, without announcement. On her kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker, was a phone. New, in the box, no note. She picked it up. The only contact saved was RC. She almost threw it in the trash. She stood there for a full minute, seriously considering it. Then she put it on her nightstand and went to bed. The next 3 days were strange in the way that only happens when something has shifted under your life without you deciding to let it shift. The car outside. The occasional figure she'd started to be able to identify. A tall guy in a gray jacket who appeared near the bus stop. A woman with short hair who was always somehow on the same block as her around noon. She'd started to learn their rhythms the way you learn the rhythms of a place you live in long enough. On the 4th day, Felix called her from the tablet. She answered without thinking. His face appeared on the screen, cracked corner and all, and he said, very seriously, "I wanted to say thank you. My mom said I had to call and say thank you, but I also actually wanted to." Tatum sat down on her couch. "You're very welcome, Felix. Uncle Ro said you're the reason I'm okay. I think you were already pretty okay," she said. "You were handling yourself." "I was scared," Felix said. "I just didn't want to show it." She looked at the serious little face on her screen, the dark eyes that were the exact same shape as his uncle's, and something in her chest did a thing she wasn't prepared for. "Being scared and not showing it is actually the definition of brave," she said. He thought about this with great seriousness. "Uncle Ro says feelings are information, not instructions. Your uncle is smarter than I expected. He says that about you too," Felix said. "That you're smarter than he expected." And then, because he was 8.5 and therefore incapable of understanding what a thing like that might do to a person, he said goodbye and ended the call. Rowan came to the diner on a Thursday afternoon, which she hadn't expected. He sat at the counter, not a corner table, not the back booth, the counter, like anyone else, and he ordered coffee and the chicken pot pie, and he didn't announce himself or make anything of his presence. Tatum brought him the coffee and said nothing. He ate the pot pie and said nothing. When she came to clear his plate, he put an envelope on the counter. "The man who broke into your apartment," he said quietly, "is no longer a concern. Neither are the 2 people he was working for." "No longer a concern," she repeated. "Should I ask what that means?" "No." She picked up the plate, left the envelope. "What's in that?" "The name and address of the driver who left Felix at the garage. What you do with it is up to you. He has a family, so I didn't. I handled it a different way. But you should know who it was." She stared at him. "You're giving me information about a person who wronged you." "Who wronged you?" he said. "You were the one sitting in a parking garage on cold concrete for 4 hours because of his choices. Not me." Tatum picked up the envelope. She put it in her apron pocket and refilled his coffee. "You're more complicated than you look," she said. He looked up at her, that almost smile again, the one that arrived and disappeared like it wasn't sure it had permission. "You're less complicated than you think," he said. "You see something that needs doing and you do it. That's not common." "It should be. It should be," he agreed. He left a $30 tip on a $12 meal and walked out into the gray November afternoon, and Tatum watched him go through the front window of the Rosewood Diner and thought about what you do with a person like that. What category you put them in. What it means when the most dangerous man you've ever met is also, somehow, the one who keeps replacing your locks and calling you smarter than he expected. She didn't have an answer, but that night she opened the new phone on her nightstand and she sent a message to the only contact in it. "Felix says feelings are information, not instructions," she wrote. "I thought you should know I'm choosing to feel fine about all of this." 3 minutes later, "Good. Then, good night, Tatum." She set the phone down and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The locks were new. The coffee maker was on the counter. Outside, somewhere on her block, a gray jacket or a woman with short hair was probably making sure nothing came through her door tonight. She was not fine about all of this, not exactly. But she was not afraid either, and that felt like something. Rowan Calder did not make promises he didn't intend to keep. That was the thing she would come to understand about him. Slowly, the way you understand structural things about a building, only after you've been inside it long enough. He did not say I'll take care of it unless he meant to. He did not say you're safe as comfort. He said it as contract. 3 weeks later, she found out that the driver who'd left Felix in the garage had quietly relocated his entire family to a city 4 states away with enough money to start over, and that this had been arranged by a man who would have been fully justified in doing something much worse, who had, by all accounts, done much worse to people who'd threatened him in far smaller ways. Felix told her, when he called again on a Sunday afternoon to tell her about a book he'd read at school that she might like. He mentioned it the same way he mentioned everything, as information, not instruction, like his uncle had taught him. Uncle Ro says sometimes you have to decide what you're doing it for, Felix said. He says that changes what the right thing is. Tatum was sitting on her fire escape with a cup of coffee, watching the street below, the ordinary Saturday movement of her ordinary neighborhood. What does your uncle do it for? Felix was quiet for a moment. 8.5 years old, with the serious face and the dark eyes and the question weighing in him like it weighed in a person twice his age. Me, he said simply. He says he does all of it for me. Somewhere in the city, she knew, Rowan Calder was in a room with people who feared him, making decisions she didn't understand and probably never would, being the person he'd become in whatever years had made him that person. And somewhere in between all of it, he had replaced her locks, given her a name she could put to a wrong, stood up when she walked into a restaurant like she was someone worth standing up for. The most broken people, someone had told her once, or maybe she'd read it or dreamed it, she couldn't remember anymore, keep the most important promises. She didn't know yet what promise Rowan Calder had made to her, or whether he knew he'd made it, but she was beginning to think that maybe that was the point of promises made by people like him. They don't announce them, they just keep them. If this story moved you, if you found yourself leaning in, holding your breath, waiting to see what Rowan would do next, then you are exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. Drop a comment below and tell me, did Tatum make the right call? Would you have stayed? And if you want more stories about the complicated spaces between dangerous and devoted, hit subscribe. New stories every week, right here at Ava's Romance Library, because the best love stories, it turns out, never start where you expect.